The stagecoach lurched to a stop just as the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks west of Red Pines, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet. Ruby Talbot gripped the worn leather handle of her traveling bag tighter, her knuckles white beneath the dust of 2 days' journey. The driver's gruff voice carried through the thin walls of the coach.
"Red Pines, Miss End of the line?"
She descended slowly, her legs stiff from the cramped quarters, boots touching down on packed dirt that hadn't seen rain in weeks. The town stretched before her, a single main street lined with weathered storefronts, their painted signs fading in the desert air. A few oil lamps flickered to life in windows, casting long shadows across the thoroughfare. People noticed her immediately. How could they not? A woman traveling alone. Arriving at dusk with no one to meet her, it was unusual enough to draw stares from the handful of townsfolk still conducting business. Ruby kept her chin level, neither defiant nor meek, and walked toward the general store where lamplight promised refuge from curious eyes. The bell above the door announced her arrival with a tinny chime. Behind the counter, a stout woman with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun looked up from her ledger. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, took in Ruby's travel-worn dress, the dust coating her dark coat, the absence of a wedding ring.
"Evening,"
Ruby said, setting her bag down carefully. "I'm looking for directions to the Red Pines Lodge, the Blackridge place." The woman's expression shifted, something between surprise and assessment. "That's a fair ride out, Miss, 3 miles north. Follow the creek, but it'll be full dark soon."
"I'm expected,"
Ruby said, though the words felt hollow. Expected by a dead woman. She thought but didn't say. "Expected," the shopkeeper's voice carried a note of disbelief. "Clay Blackridge ain't expecting nobody, far as I know. Man keeps to himself since—" She stopped abruptly, lips pursing. Ruby reached into her coat pocket, fingers finding the envelope worn soft from handling. The letter inside bore elegant script, each word carefully formed asterisk. "Dear Miss Talbot, I write to offer you a position as cook at our Red Pines Lodge. Your reputation from the Riverside boarding house has reached even our remote corner of the territory. Room, board, and fair wages await. Should you accept, most sincerely, Mrs. Abigail Blackridge." 3 weeks old. That letter. Ruby had discovered upon arriving in the last town that Abigail Blackridge had passed 10 days before the invitation was posted. Pneumonia, they said, swift and merciless.
"I have a letter of employment,"
Ruby said simply, not producing it. "From Mrs. Blackridge." The shopkeeper's face softened with something like pity. "Oh, dear, you don't know. Then Mrs. Blackridge passed 3 weeks hence, buried her up on the hill beside the chapel." Ruby let the appropriate amount of shock cross her features.
I see. How unfortunate."
"Indeed. Poor Clay's been managing alone out there. Man can barely boil water without burning it." The woman leaned forward conspiratorially. "You might still inquire. Lord knows he needs help, though whether he'll admit it is another matter. Stubborn as a mule. That one." Ruby nodded, gathering her bag.
"I've come this far. Seems foolish not to try."
"You got a horse?" "No, ma'am." The shopkeeper sighed. "Wait here." She disappeared into the back room, returning with a lantern. "My boy Samuel can take you in the wagon. He's heading that direction anyway, delivering supplies to the Henley farm. He'll drop you at the lodge gate." "That's very kind. I can pay—" "No need. Abigail Blackridge was good people. If she sent for you, there was reason." The woman's eyes narrowed slightly. "Though I wonder why she didn't mention it to anyone." Ruby had wondered the same thing during her journey. Why reach out to a cook from a boarding house 2 territories away they'd never met, had no mutual acquaintances that Ruby knew of? Yet the letter had found her just when she needed somewhere to go, somewhere far from Riverside and its memories. Samuel appeared a gangly youth of perhaps 16, all knees and elbows. He loaded Ruby's bag onto a rickety wagon without comment, helping her up to the bench seat with unexpected gallantry. As they rolled out of town, the last light fading from the sky, Ruby pulled her coat tighter against the evening chill. The road wound north along a creek bed, cottonwoods rustling in the slight breeze. Samuel proved mercifully taciturn, leaving Ruby to her thoughts. She'd learned to appreciate silence in the past months, finding it preferable to the alternative questions. Speculation, judgment, after what felt like hours but was likely less than one. Samuel pointed ahead. "There's the gate. I'll wait to see you're let in proper." The entrance to Red Pines Lodge was marked by 2 stone pillars and an iron arch, the metalwork spelling out the ranch's name in bold letters, Beyond. Ruby could make out the dark shapes of buildings, a main house, barn, various outbuildings. A single light burned in what might be the kitchen window. She climbed down, boots crunching on gravel. "Thank you, Samuel." The boy touched his hat brim. "Ma'am." Ruby walked through the gate, her bag bumping against her leg with each step. The house grew larger as she approached a solid 2-story structure of timber and stone, built to withstand the harsh seasons. She climbed the porch steps, noting the well-maintained boards, the rocking chair positioned to catch the morning sun. Her knock echoed hollow in the evening air. For a long moment, nothing. Then heavy footsteps, the scrape of a bolt being drawn. The door opened to reveal a man who could only be Clay Blackridge. He was taller than she'd expected, broad-shouldered in the way of men who worked with their hands, dark hair, unkempt, as if he'd been running fingers through it. His face bore the weathered look of someone who spent more time outdoors than in, with lines around gray eyes that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. He wore work clothes, canvas pants, a flannel shirt with rolled sleeves revealing forearms marked by old scars. "Help you?" His voice was low, rusty from disuse. Mr. Blackridge, I'm Ruby Talbot. Your wife sent for me, about the cook position." Something flickered across his features, confusion, pain, perhaps anger. "My wife's been dead 3 weeks, Miss Talbot, and I'm sorry for your loss. The letter was posted before her passing." Ruby kept her voice steady, matter of fact. She'd learned that meeting emotion with calm often diffused tension. "I've traveled 2 days to get here, from Riverside." Clay Blackridge studied her in the lamplight spilling from behind him. His gaze took in her practical dress, her steady stance despite obvious fatigue, the determined set of her jaw. She wasn't what he'd expected if he'd been expecting anything at all, neither young nor old, perhaps 30, with auburn hair escaping from beneath a simple bonnet and green eyes that didn't waver under his scrutiny. Abby didn't mention hiring anyone. "Nevertheless, here I am." Ruby shifted her bag to the other hand. "I can show you the letter if you like." A long silence stretched between them. In the distance, a coyote called, answered by another. Finally, Clay stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in, then. No sense standing in the cold." The interior was much as Ruby had imagined functional. Clean, but lacking the touches that spoke of a woman's presence. Clay led her to the kitchen, a spacious room with a large stove, well-stocked shelves, and a table scarred from years of use. He gestured to a chair. "Coffee?" "Please." He moved with surprising efficiency for someone who supposedly couldn't boil water. Ruby watched him measure grounds, pour water from a kettle kept warm on the stove. His movements were automatic, practiced, a man used to fending for himself, whatever the local gossips believed. "The letter," he said without turning. "May I see it?" Ruby produced the envelope, sliding it across the table. Clay dried his hands on a cloth before picking it up, studying his wife's handwriting on the outside before extracting the single sheet within. His face remained impassive as he read, but Ruby noticed the way his fingers tightened on the paper. "This is Abby's hand," he said finally. "Though why she—" He trailed off, folding the letter carefully and setting it aside. "She managed the household. I managed the ranch." We didn't always discuss her decisions. The coffee was strong, bitter. Ruby drank it gratefully, feeling warmth seep into her bones. I understand if you don't need... I owe my wife several things. Clay interrupted, his voice rough. If she said you should come, then you should stay. The job's yours if you want it. Just like that. His smile was fleeting, tinged with sadness. Abby was the smartest person I knew. If she thought you belonged here, that's enough for me. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. The pay's what she promised. Room and board included. There's a room upstairs, used to be my sister's before she married. It's clean, has its own washstand. You'd take your meals with me, if that suits. I work sunrise to sunset most days, sometimes later. You'd have run of the kitchen, keep your own hours mostly. Ruby nodded slowly. It was more than she'd hoped for. Yet something in his manner suggested he was the one doing her a favor rather than the reverse. That's generous, Mr. Blackridge. Clay, he corrected. We don't stand on ceremony here. He rose, suddenly seeming to fill the kitchen. I'll show you the room. You can decide in the morning if you want to stay. They climbed narrow stairs to a hallway lit by a single lamp. Clay opened the second door, revealing a small but pleasant room. A brass bed with a quilt in wedding ring pattern, a wardrobe, a chair by the window. Everything clean but untouched, as if waiting. Sarah married 5 years back, Clay said quietly. Lives in California now. She'd be glad someone's using it again. Ruby set her bag by the bed, running a hand over the quilt. Quality work, each tiny stitch perfect. It's lovely, thank you. Clay lingered in the doorway, seeming to want to say something more. Finally, breakfast is at 6. Earlier if you hear me moving around. Kitchen's yours after that pantry's full. Root cellar out back. There's a ledger for household accounts in the drawer by the stove. I'll manage. I expect you will. Again that fleeting smile. Abby wouldn't have sent for you otherwise. He left her then, his footsteps receding down the hall. Ruby sat on the bed, testing its firmness, and allowed herself a moment to simply breathe. She'd done it, found a place, a position, a purpose. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight she had a roof over her head and honest work ahead. Through the window, she could see stars beginning to emerge, brilliant in the clear high desert air. Somewhere in the house below, she heard Clay moving about. The ordinary sounds of a man preparing for evening, not threatening, just present. Ruby unpacked slowly, hanging her few dresses in the wardrobe, placing her mother's Bible on the nightstand. At the bottom of her bag, wrapped in tissue, lay a small framed photograph. She looked at it for a long moment before placing it face down in the drawer. Some things were better left buried, at least for now. When she finally lay down, still dressed but too tired to care, Ruby found herself thinking of Abigail Blackridge, a woman she'd never meet, who'd reached out across miles and territories to offer a stranger sanctuary. Perhaps that's what they recognized in each other, the need for refuge, for a place to start again. Tomorrow, she would cook. She would earn her keep, prove herself worthy of Abigail's faith. And perhaps, in time, she would sleep without dreams. But tonight, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a new place wind in the cottonwoods, the distant lowing of cattle, the creak of settling timbers, Ruby Talbot simply existed. It was enough. It was a beginning. Ruby woke before dawn, disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling above her. For a moment, she couldn't place herself. Then memory rushed back. Red Pines Lodge, Clay Blackridge, a new beginning. She dressed quickly in the cold room, pinning her hair back with practiced efficiency. The house was silent as she made her way downstairs, but the kitchen showed signs of recent occupation, the coffee pot still warm on the stove, a cup rinsed and set to dry. Through the window, she could see a lantern moving in the barn. By the time Clay returned, Ruby had breakfast well underway. Bacon sizzled in the skillet. Biscuits rose in the oven. Eggs waited in a bowl. She'd found the pantry well stocked, as promised, and the kitchen organized in a way that spoke of Abigail's careful hand. Clay stopped in the doorway, surprise evident on his face.
"You're up early?" "A cook rises before the household,"
Ruby said, not turning from the stove. "Coffee's fresh." He poured himself a cup, then stood awkwardly, as if unsure where to position himself in his own kitchen. Ruby noticed, but said nothing, focusing on flipping the bacon. The silence stretched. Not quite comfortable, but not hostile either. "Smells good," he offered finally. "Sit, it'll be ready in a moment." Clay took his place at the head of the table, watching as she moved about the kitchen with growing confidence. When she set the plate before him, eggs over easy, bacon crisp, biscuits golden, and something in his expression softened. "Abby used to make biscuits like these." Ruby paused in the act of pouring more coffee.
"I'm sorry, I didn't mean to."
"No," he shook his head.
"It's good. Place has been too quiet."
He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully. "You cook like this at the boarding house?"
3 meals a day for 20 men.
Ruby settled across from him with her own plate.
Minors, mostly. Hearty appetites.
Why leave? The question hung between them. Ruby had prepared for this, had her answer ready. Time for a change. The owner sold to his nephew, who had different ideas about how things should run. It wasn't entirely a lie. There had been a sale, new management, but that wasn't why she'd left Riverside in such haste, taking only what she could carry. Clay seemed to sense there was more, but didn't press. Perhaps he had his own secrets, his own reasons for accepting half-truths. "Well, Red Pines isn't a boarding house," he said after a moment. "Just me and 3 hands who take their meals at midday. Tom Miller, Joe Harmon, and young Eddie Crane. Good men, hard workers. They'll appreciate having decent food again." "What have you been feeding them?" A rueful smile crossed his features.
"Beans, burnt beef, whatever doesn't require much thought."
He pushed back from the table. "I'll introduce you later. Got to check the water tanks first, haven't had rain in 2 weeks." Ruby began clearing the dishes.
"What would Mrs. Blackridge have done with her mornings?"
Clay paused at the door, his back to her. "Baking, usually. She sold bread and pies to folks in town. Put the money toward projects." His voice caught slightly on the last word.
"Garden out back needs tending. She grew vegetables for the table. Chickens need feeding, eggs collecting. But don't feel you have to do everything at once."
Then he was gone, leaving Ruby alone in the kitchen that still carried another woman's ghost. She washed the dishes slowly, learning the room through its cupboards and drawers. In one, she found Abigail's household ledger. Neat columns of figures tracking expenses and income. The last entry was dated 3 days before her death floor. Coffee, writing paper. By the time the sun was fully up, Ruby had biscuits cooling on the counter and a pot of stew simmering for the midday meal. She ventured outside, finding the chicken coop where a dozen hens clucked and fussed. They scattered at her approach, then gradually returned when she scattered grain from the bin mounted on the wall. The garden was indeed neglected. Autumn vegetables going to seed. Ruby walked the rows, mentally cataloging what might be salvaged. Squash, late beans, herbs grown woody with neglect. She'd worked harder ground than this. "Ma'am." Ruby turned to find a young man, perhaps 19, hat in hand. Sandy hair fell across a sunburned forehead, and his smile was shy but genuine.
"You must be Eddie,"
she said. "Yes, ma'am. Eddie Crane, Mr. Blackridge said to tell you we'll be ready for dinner at noon, if that suits."
"That suits fine. How do you take your coffee?"
His grin widened. "Black as midnight and strong enough to float a horseshoe. Same as the others, excepting Joe, who likes enough sugar to rot your teeth." Ruby found herself smiling back. "I'll remember that." Eddie shifted his weight, clearly wanting to say more. "Ma'am, we're all real sorry about Mrs. Blackridge. She was kind to us. But we're glad, Mr. Clay's got help again. He's been—" The boy searched for words. "He's been carrying too much alone." "I'll do my best," Ruby said simply. Eddie nodded and retreated, leaving Ruby to wonder what burdens Clay Blackridge carried beyond the obvious grief. She returned to the kitchen, checking her stew and starting cornbread to go with it. At precisely noon, Boots stomped on the porch. Ruby had the table set for 4, assuming Clay would join his men, but only 3 entered. Besides Eddie, there was Tom Muller, a compact man in his 40s with careful eyes, and Joe Harmon, whose massive frame seemed to fill the doorway. "Ma'am," they said in unison, removing their hats. "Gentlemen, please, sit. Coffee's hot." They ate with the focused intensity of working men, but Ruby noticed their manners were decent. Tom complimented the cornbread. Joe asked for seconds, then thirds. Eddie snuck glances at her when he thought she wasn't looking. Curiosity plain on his young face. "Where's Mr. Blackridge?" she asked, refilling coffee cups. The men exchanged glances. Tom answered carefully. "Boss takes his noon meal alone. Usually, has since—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "He'll be in the north pasture, checking fences." Ruby absorbed this information without comment. After the men left with thanks and promises to be prompt tomorrow, she packed a plate with food still warm and wrapped it in a clean cloth. The north pasture wasn't hard to find. She could see a lone figure working along a fence line, fighting with a stubborn post. Clay looked up at her approach, wariness flashing across his features. "Something wrong?" "You missed dinner." "I don't—" He stopped, seeming to realize how churlish he sounded. "I usually just grab something later." "Well, now you don't have to." Ruby set the bundle on a flat rock. "Man can't work on an empty stomach." She turned to go, but his voice stopped her. "Miss Talbot." "Ruby," she corrected, echoing his words from the night before. "Ruby?" He tested the name carefully. "Thank you." She nodded and walked back toward the house, feeling his eyes on her retreating form. Behind her, she heard the cloth unwrapping, knew he would eat what she'd brought. Small victories. The afternoon passed in domestic rhythms. Ruby explored the pantry more thoroughly, made mental lists of supplies needed. She found Abigail's recipe box, filled with cards in that same elegant script, raised in Boston. The notations told her. Pies that won prizes at the county fair, preserves that sold out at the church bazaar. "Who were you?" Abigail Blackridge, Ruby wondered. "And why did you send for me?" As shadows lengthened, she started supper preparations. Something simple: fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans she'd salvaged from the garden. She was rolling out dough for apple pie when Clay appeared, having cleaned up from his day's labor. "Smells like heaven in here," he said, then caught himself as if the pleasure in his voice was somehow wrong. "Just supper," Ruby said mildly. "The hand said you usually eat at 6. "Thereabouts." He hovered near the door again. That same uncertainty in his posture. "Need any help?" Ruby glanced at him, surprised. "Can you peel apples?" "I can." They worked in companionable quiet. Clay's large hands surprisingly deft with the paring knife. Ruby noticed the wedding ring still on his finger, the way he occasionally touched it absently. She thought of her own bare finger. The mark finally faded after months. "How long were you married?" she asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. But Clay answered readily enough. 8 years. You." The question caught her off guard. I'm not widowed, that is—" He glanced at her, taking in what that admission meant. A woman alone, unclaimed by marriage or widowhood, the kind of story that invited speculation. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I shouldn't have assumed." "No need to apologize." Ruby focused on crimping the pie crust. "We all have our stories." That we do. He finished the last apple, setting the bowl between them. Abby and I couldn't have children. It grieved her something fierce. Maybe that's why. He trailed off. Why what? Nothing, just thinking aloud. But his eyes lingered on her face, as if seeing something that wasn't quite there yet. They ate supper together at the kitchen table, a simple meal that felt somehow significant. Clay asked about her plans for the garden. Ruby inquired about the ranch operations, safe topics that skirted around deeper currents. After, while Ruby washed dishes, Clay stood by the window looking out at the darkening sky. Winter's coming early this year. Can smell it in the air. I don't mind winter, Ruby said. There's something honest about it. No pretense, just survival. He turned to study her. That's a hard way to look at it. Sometimes hard is what we need. She dried her hands, met his gaze. I'll have breakfast ready at 6 again, if that suits. It suits. He moved toward the door, then paused. Ruby, I'm glad you're here. Whatever Abby's reasons were for writing to you, I think she knew what she was doing. Then he was gone, leaving Ruby alone with the dying light and the echo of words that felt like acceptance. She finished tidying the kitchen, then made her way upstairs. In her room, she sat by the window and watched stars emerge one by one, somewhere in the house. She heard Clay moving about, preparing for his own rest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new rhythms to learn. But tonight, for the first time in months, Ruby Talbot felt the possibility of home. She thought again of Abigail Blackridge, the woman who had reached across distance and death to bring her here. Perhaps tomorrow she would walk up to the cemetery on the hill, pay her respects properly. Perhaps she would find answers there. Or perhaps, Ruby thought as she prepared for bed, the answer was simply, this two damaged people in a kitchen, peeling apples while the day died around them. Not healing, not yet, but no longer quite so alone. It was enough for now. The days settled into rhythm like dust after a storm. Ruby rose before dawn, had coffee ready when Clay emerged from his room, breakfast on the table before he finished his first cup. They ate in comfortable silence, exchanging only necessary words about the day ahead. Then he would disappear into the vast expanse of the ranch while she claimed the kitchen as her domain. 2 weeks passed this way. Ruby learned the particular creak of the third stair, the way the pantry door stuck in damp weather, which burner on the stove ran hottest. She learned that Tom Muller liked extra black pepper on everything, that Joe Harmon was shy about his sweet tooth but grateful for cake, that Eddie Crane would linger after meals to help dry dishes and share stories of his family back in Missouri. She learned Clay's patterns too, though he remained more enigma than open book. He took his coffee black but stirred it exactly 3 times, clockwise. He favored his left shoulder, an old injury, she guessed, from the way he shifted weight when tired. He still wore his wedding ring but had moved Abigail's from the hook by the door to somewhere private. What she didn't learn was why Abigail had written to her, or what thoughts kept Clay staring out windows at nothing, or why sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't read. The guest room, for that's what Ruby still called it in her mind, despite sleeping there each night, became familiar in its own way. She'd added small touches, a cloth for the dresser, wildflowers in a mason jar, her mother's quilt from her bag to layer over Abigail's. But she hadn't unpacked everything. Some belongings stayed folded, ready to be grabbed if leaving became necessary. Old habits died hard. On this particular morning, a Thursday that threatened rain, Ruby found Clay in the kitchen earlier than usual. He stood by the window, coffee cup forgotten in his hand, staring at the lightning that flickered along the horizon. "Storm coming," he said without turning. "The washing will have to wait then." Ruby moved to the stove, began preparing breakfast. "Will the men work in the rain?" "Have to. Got cattle to move from the low ground before it floods." He finally looked at her. "Might be late for supper." "I'll keep something warm." He nodded, started to say something else, then seemed to think better of it, but he lingered, watching her work with that unreadable expression. "What is it?" Ruby asked finally, hand still on the skillet. "Nothing, just—" He set his cup down carefully. "You move like her sometimes. Abby, same efficiency, like you're dancing with the kitchen itself." Ruby didn't know how to respond to that, so she didn't. After a moment, Clay grabbed his hat and left, the door closing firmly behind him. She stood frozen, bacon beginning to crisp in the pan, wondering if she'd just received a compliment or a complaint. The storm broke just after the men finished their noon meal. Rain lashed against the windows, turning the yard to mud within minutes. Ruby watched from the kitchen as Clay and his hands drove cattle to higher ground, their shapes blurred by the downpour. She kept coffee hot and towels ready, knowing they'd need both when they returned. It was while searching for more towels that she found it tucked in the back of the linen closet, a wooden box that didn't belong among the practical linens. Ruby hesitated, knowing she had no right to pry, but something about the box called to her, perhaps its very hiddenness. Inside were letters, dozens of them, tied with faded ribbon. The top one was addressed to Abigail Blackridge in a woman's hand. Ruby recognized the postmark Riverside, dated 6 months ago. Her heart lurched. With trembling fingers, she opened it. Asterisk. My dear Abigail. It began, asterisk. How wonderful to hear from you after all these years. Yes, I remember little Ruby from church, though she's hardly little anymore. Such a tragedy about her circumstances. That man never deserved her. When I heard what happened, my heart broke. Ruby sank onto the hallway floor, rain drumming overhead as she read. The letter was from Mrs. Paulson, who'd run the mercantile in Riverside when Ruby was a child. Somehow, Abigail had tracked her down, had inquired about Ruby specifically. The next letter was Abigail's draft response, asterisk. Thank you for your candor about Miss Talbot's situation. I believe Red Pines could offer her the fresh start she needs. A woman shouldn't be punished forever for trusting the wrong man. Thunder cracked overhead, making Ruby jump. She quickly retied the letters and returned the box to its hiding place, but the words echoed in her mind as she descended the stairs. Abigail had known, had deliberately sought her out, offered her sanctuary when she needed it most. The kitchen door burst open, admitting a thoroughly soaked Eddie Crane. "Ma'am, mister, Clay says to tell you there'll be another hour at least. Asked if you could maybe bring coffee out to the barn when you get a chance." "Of course. Tell him 10 minutes. Ruby loaded a tray with a coffee pot, cups, and towels. She threw on an oilcloth coat and made her way through the rain to the barn. Inside, she found organized chaos cattle lowing, men working to settle them, everything smelling of wet hide and hay. Clay emerged from the far stall, water streaming from his hat. "Ruby, you didn't need to come out in this." "You asked for coffee." She set the tray on a workbench. "Towels, too." He took one gratefully, wiping his face. Up close, she could see exhaustion in the lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders curved with fatigue. Without thinking, she poured him coffee and pressed the cup into his hands. "When's the last time you ate?" "Breakfast," he admitted. Ruby made an exasperated sound. "There's stew on the stove. Come in when you can." "Yes, ma'am," he said with a ghost of a smile. She was halfway to the door when his voice stopped her. "Ruby, thank you for all of this. I know I don't say it enough." She turned back, studying him in the dim light. "You don't need to thank me for doing my job. It's more than that, and you know it." His gray eyes held hers steadily. "This place was dying before you came. Now it feels alive again." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning neither seemed ready to explore. Ruby nodded once and fled into the rain. Back in the kitchen, she busied herself with supper preparations, trying not to think about the letters or Clay's words, or the way her heart had stuttered when he'd looked at her like that. She was here to work, to rebuild her life, not to complicate it with feelings she couldn't afford. The men trooped in an hour later, tired but triumphant. All the cattle were safe on high ground. Ruby served generous portions of stew and cornbread, keeping coffee flowing. Clay ate with focused intensity, occasionally meeting her eyes across the kitchen. Each time, something passed between them, acknowledgement, gratitude, maybe something more. After the hands left, Clay lingered. "Hell of a storm," he said finally.
"Language,"
Ruby said automatically, then flushed.
"Sorry, habit from the boarding house."
His laugh was rusty but genuine. "Abby used to scold me for the same thing." The mention of his wife sobered him. "I should check the roof for leaks. This old place doesn't always hold up well in weather like this."
"I'll help,"
Ruby offered before she could stop herself. They moved through the house together, checking ceilings and windows. In what had been Abigail's sewing room, they found a steady drip from the corner. Clay fetched a bucket while Ruby moved fabric and notions away from the leak.
"She spent hours in here,"
Clay said quietly, watching Ruby carefully fold a half-finished quilt. Said the rhythm of sewing helped her think.
"What was she like?"
Ruby asked, surprising herself with the question. Clay considered, sitting on a wooden chair that creaked under his weight. Determined, kind but not soft, if that makes sense. She saw through people, knew their hearts before they did. He picked up a spool of thread, turning it in his fingers. "I think she would have liked you. Even though I'm not what people expect an unmarried woman, traveling alone, taking work in a strange man's house, especially because of that," Clay said firmly. Abby believed in second chances, said everyone deserved a place to start over. Ruby thought of the letters hidden in the linen closet.
"She sounds wonderful."
"She was." Clay stood abruptly. "I should let you get some rest. Long day tomorrow." But at the doorway, he paused. "Ruby, I'm glad she brought you here. Whatever her reasons, I'm grateful." Then he was gone, leaving Ruby alone in the room that still held his wife's dreams. She finished securing the fabric, placed the bucket under the leak, and made her way to her own room. Outside, the storm was passing, thunder growing distant. As she prepared for bed, Ruby allowed herself to think about Clay's words, about the way this house was beginning to feel less like a job and more like home. Dangerous thoughts for a woman in her position. She'd trusted before, had believed in forever, and look where that had gotten her. But as she lay listening to rain on the roof, Ruby couldn't deny the truth. Something was happening here, something as gradual and inevitable as the seasons changing. She and Clay were learning each other's rhythms, creating new patterns in the space grief had left behind. Neither of them spoke of it. Perhaps they never would. But it was there in every shared meal, every comfortable silence, every glance that lasted a heartbeat too long. Ruby closed her eyes, one hand touching the empty place where a ring had never quite fit right. Somewhere in the house, she heard Clay's footsteps, the familiar sound of him checking locks before bed. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, safe in a room given freely, working for a man who noticed her absence and appreciated her presence. Ruby Talbot felt something she hadn't in months. She felt like she belonged. The feeling terrified her almost as much as it comforted, but she held on to it anyway, a small flame against the darkness, as rain gentled into silence and the house settled into sleep around her. The first frost came on a Tuesday, silvering the grass and sending Ruby to the woodpile before starting breakfast. She'd grown accustomed to the pre-dawn darkness, moving through the kitchen by feel and instinct, but this morning felt different charged somehow, as if the air itself held secrets. Clay was already up, standing by the window with his coffee, watching the sun paint the frosted landscape gold. He'd been doing that more lately, these quiet vigils that seemed to be about more than checking the weather. "Beautiful morning," Ruby observed, setting bacon to fry. "Winter's knocking," he replied without turning. "Need to bring the horses closer, get the barn ready." She nodded. though he couldn't see it. They'd developed this shorthand over the past month, conversations that said more in their gaps than their words. Ruby had learned to read his moods by the set of his shoulders, the way he held his cup. This morning, something was weighing on him. The men came for their midday meal as usual, stomping frost from their boots and exclaiming over the apple pie she'd made from the last of the orchard fruit. After they left, Ruby cleaned up and went to gather eggs, her breath misting in the cold air. That evening, Clay worked late in the barn. Ruby kept supper warm, watching darkness creep across the land. When he finally came in, she could see exhaustion written in every line of his body. "Sit," she commanded. "Food first, then you can tell me what's troubling you." He looked surprised at her directness, but sat obediently. Ruby served him pot roast with winter vegetables, fresh bread still warm from the oven. She poured herself coffee and sat across from him, waiting. "One of the horses is sick," he said finally. "Dancer, Abby's mare. Don't think she'll make it through the night." Ruby had seen the pretty bay horse in the pasture, had noticed how Clay always saved the best apples for her. "I'm sorry." "Abby loved that horse, raised her from a foal." He pushed food around his plate. "Seems like I'm losing pieces of her one by one." "Or maybe," Ruby said carefully, "you're learning to let go. There's a difference." Clay's head snapped up, something flashing in his eyes, anger, pain, but it faded as quickly as it came. "Maybe," he said quietly. "I'll sit with the horse tonight." Ruby heard herself offer, "You need rest." "That's not your job. Neither is mending your shirts or organizing your accounts, but I do those too." She softened her tone. "Let me help, Clay." He studied her for a long moment. "We could take turns. I'll take first watch." After supper, Ruby prepared a basket with coffee, blankets, and food for later. She found Clay in the barn, sitting on a bale of hay near Dancer's stall. The mare lay on her side, breathing labored, eyes dulled with pain. "Vet came this afternoon," Clay said without preamble. "Said there's nothing to be done. Just keep her comfortable." Ruby spread a blanket on the hay beside him, close enough to share warmth, but not touching. They sat in companionable silence, listening to the mare's breathing and the settling of the barn around them. "Tell me about her," Ruby said eventually. Clay's smile was sad but genuine. "Abby found her tangled in wire fence, half dead. Must have been all of 2 days old. Vet said she wouldn't make it, but Abby—" He shook his head. "She bottle-fed that foal every 2 hours for weeks. Slept out here more nights than in our bed. I used to joke she loved that horse more than me." "Did she? Sometimes I wondered—" His voice held no bitterness, only fond remembrance. "But then she'd look at me a certain way, or leave notes in my lunch pail, or curl against me on cold nights. And I knew we were just different in how we showed it." Ruby pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "That sounds like love to me. The real kind, not the storybook version." Speaking from experience. The question hung between them. Ruby had managed to avoid discussing her past beyond vague references, but sitting here in the lamplight, walls felt less necessary. "I thought I was in love once," she said slowly. "James Morrison. Handsome, charming, said all the right things. Everyone told me how lucky I was when he started courting me." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Turns out he was courting 3 other women at the same time. When I confronted him, he didn't even deny it. Said I should be grateful for whatever attention he gave me, plain as I was." Clay made a sound low in his throat. "He was a fool. I was the fool. I gave up everything for him, my reputation, my savings, my—" She stopped, unable to voice the rest. "When it all came apart, I couldn't stay in Riverside. The whispers, the looks, the good women clutching their husbands closer when I walked by, as if I might steal them too." "Is that when Abby wrote to you?" Ruby's breath caught. "You knew." "Found the letters last week when I was looking for winter blankets. He glanced at her. I wasn't snooping. They were just there. Are you angry that she brought a fallen woman into your home? Clay turned to face her fully then, his expression fierce. You're not fallen. You're human. You trusted someone who didn't deserve it. That's not a sin. Ruby, that's just life. The mare whinnied softly, drawing their attention. Clay moved to stroke her neck, murmuring soothing words. Ruby watched him. This man who could be so gentle with a dying animal, who'd accepted her presence without judgment. Your turn to rest, she said. I'll wake you in a few hours. He hesitated, then nodded. Thank you. But instead of leaving, he stretched out on the hay nearby, hat tipped over his eyes. I'll just sleep a bit here, easier than going back to the house. Ruby smiled at his transparency. Of course. She kept watch as the night deepened, occasionally checking the mare, refilling the water bucket. Clay's breathing evened out, and she found herself studying him in the lamplight. Asleep. The lines of grief and responsibility softened, revealing the younger man he must have been. She wondered what he'd been like before loss carved those grooves around his eyes. Around midnight, the mare's breathing grew more labored. Ruby touched Clay's shoulder gently. Clay. He woke instantly, alert. One look at Dancer and he knew. He knelt by the mare's head, stroking her face, whispering words Ruby couldn't catch. She moved to the horse's other side, one hand on the warm flank, feeling life ebb like a tide going out. When it was over, Clay's shoulders shook once, silently. Without thinking, Ruby moved around the horse and placed a hand on his back. He didn't pull away, and they stayed like that for long minutes, connected by touch and shared loss. She was the last big piece, he said finally, voice rough. Everything else has been small things, her clothes donated, her jewelry given to Sarah, but Dancer was supposed to live longer. I'm so sorry, Ruby whispered. He turned then, and she saw tears on his cheeks, silver in the lamplight. Something shifted in her chest, a wall crumbling. She opened her arms, and he leaned into her, this strong man made vulnerable by grief. They held each other in the hay-scented darkness, not as employer and employee, not as man and woman, but as two souls who understood loss. Ruby felt his breathing gradually steady against her shoulder, felt her own eyes burn with unshed tears for the horse, for Abigail, for all the losses that had brought them to this moment. When Clay finally pulled back, his expression was raw but peaceful. Thank you, he said simply. We should go in, Ruby said, suddenly aware of the intimacy of their position. It's cold. They walked to the house in silence, the frost crunching beneath their feet. At the kitchen door, Clay paused. Ruby, He stopped, shook his head. Sleep well. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Inside, they parted ways. Clay to his room, Ruby to hers. But she lay awake long into the night, feeling the phantom weight of his head on her shoulder, the warmth of another human's trust. In the morning, Tom and Joe would help Clay bury Dancer in the pasture she'd loved. Life would continue its rhythm, but something fundamental had changed in the barn, in the shared vigil and the tears and the comfort offered without thought. Ruby touched her shoulder where Clay had leaned, wondering at the feeling blooming in her chest. Not love, not yet, but something that might grow into it given time and tending, like Abigail with her orphaned foal. Ruby thought, sometimes the things that seem impossible just need someone stubborn enough to believe in them. She turned her face into the pillow, allowing herself a small smile. I'll just sleep, she whispered to the darkness, knowing it for the lie it was. But sometimes lies were just hope dressed in safer clothes. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight she'd held a grieving man and been held in return, and that was enough truth for anyone. Outside her window, the first snow of winter began to fall, blanketing the world in white, covering the old to make way for the new. The whispers started at church. Ruby had been attending Sunday services for 3 weeks now, sitting in the back pew with her hands folded and her eyes forward. Clay didn't accompany her. Hadn't set foot in church since Abigail's funeral. He'd told her, but he'd offered the use of the wagon, and Tom Muller had volunteered to drive her. This particular Sunday, the first week of November, Ruby noticed the shift immediately. Mrs. Hartwell, the banker's wife, leaned close to Mrs. Pritchard during the opening hymn, their eyes cut toward Ruby, then away. By the time Reverend Morrison, no relation to James, thankfully began his sermon on charity and kindness, half the congregation had stolen glances at her. After the service, Ruby made her way to the door, chin high. She'd weathered worse storms than small-town gossip. "Miss Talbot," Mrs. Hartwell's voice carried that particular tone of false concern. "How are you finding life at the Black Ridge Ranch?" "Very well, thank you," Ruby replied evenly. "It must be challenging. A woman alone with a widowed man. People do talk, you know." "Do they?" Ruby kept her voice mild. "How exhausting for them." Mrs. Pritchard tittered nervously. "Now, Clara, I'm sure Miss Talbot understands the importance of propriety. Don't you?" "Dear, I understand the importance of hard work and earning an honest wage." Ruby said, "If that's improper, then I confess myself guilty." She excused herself before they could respond. Finding Tom waiting by the wagon, his weathered face showed disapproval not of her, she realized, but of what he'd likely overheard. "Don't mind them hens," he said gruffly as they pulled away. "They got nothing better to do than peck at folks trying to make their way." Ruby managed a smile. "I've been pecked at before. Mr. Muller, I survived." But the encounter left her unsettled. She'd known this would come eventually, a single woman living with a widowed man, even with the buffer of employment. Invited speculation. What surprised her was how much it stung. Not for herself, but for Clay. He didn't deserve to have his reputation questioned because of her presence. When they arrived at the ranch, Ruby found Clay in the kitchen, awkwardly attempting to prepare lunch. Flour dusted his shirt, and something that might have been biscuit dough clung to his fingers. "Thought I'd have something ready when you got back," he said, looking sheepish. "Didn't go quite as planned." Despite her mood, Ruby smiled. "I see that. Why don't you wash up? I'll salvage what I can." As she worked, Clay leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "Something happened at church." Ruby kept her eyes on the salvageable dough. "Just the usual Christian charity." "Ah," his voice hardened. "Which particular charitable soul?" "It doesn't matter." "It does to me." She looked up then, surprised by the edge in his voice. Mrs. Hartwell expressed concern about the propriety of our arrangement. Others seemed to share her worry. Clay's jaw tightened. Clara Hartwell wouldn't know propriety if it bit her on her bustle. Woman's had her nose in everyone's business since before I was born. "She's not entirely wrong, though," Ruby said carefully. "People will talk. Your reputation." "My reputation?" Clay laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Ruby, I lost my wife, buried her on the hill, and haven't been able to bring myself to visit her grave since. I worked myself to exhaustion rather than face an empty bed. I was dying by inches before you came. If people want to talk about that, let 'em." Ruby abandoned the biscuits entirely. "Clay!" "No." He pushed off from the doorframe, pacing the kitchen. "I'm tired of it, tired of the sympathy, the whispers, the way they look at me like I might shatter. You're the first person in months to treat me like a man instead of a tragedy." "You are a man," Ruby said quietly. "A good one, which is why I won't let my presence here harm you." He stopped pacing, faced her fully. "Are you thinking of leaving?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Ruby thought of the room upstairs that had begun to feel like hers, the kitchen she'd claimed, the ranch hands who tipped their hats and praised her cooking. She thought of quiet evenings by the fire, Clay reading while she mended, comfortable silences that felt like home.
I don't want to,
she admitted. Then don't. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. I'll go to church next Sunday. Sit beside you if you'll have me. Let them see there's nothing improper about a man protecting what's his. He caught himself, color rising. That is, protecting his household, his employee. Ruby felt heat in her own cheeks. That might make things worse, fuel more speculation. Or it might show them I'm not ashamed, that I stand by my choices. His voice dropped. That I stand by you. Before Ruby could respond, the kitchen door burst open. Eddie Crane stood there, breathless and wide-eyed. Mr. Clay, Miss Ruby, there's trouble in town. Fire at the general store. The moment shattered. Clay grabbed his hat. All business again. Get Tom and Joe. We'll take the wagon, all the buckets we can find. He glanced at Ruby. Can you prepare food? Bandages there'll be need after. Of course. Then he was gone, the men rallying with practiced efficiency. Ruby packed baskets with supply sandwiches, coffee, clean cloth for bandages, salve for burns. By the time the wagon disappeared down the road, she had everything ready and more. The wait was agony. Ruby busied herself preparing for whatever might come, heating water, laying out medical supplies, cooking enough to feed half the town if needed. The afternoon stretched endlessly. It was near sunset when she heard horses. Ruby rushed outside to see the wagon returning, loaded with soot-covered figures. Clay jumped down, his shirt singed, his face streaked with ash. Is everyone all right? She asked. Few burns, lot of smoke inhalation. We saved most of the building. He gestured to the men climbing down. Brought back the worst cases. Can you bring them in? Ruby said, already moving. Kitchen set up. For the next 2 hours, Ruby tended burns, washed smoke from streaming eyes, forced water on dehydrated men. She moved with the same efficiency she'd learned in Riverside, when mining accidents brought broken men to her door. Mrs. Hartwell arrived with her husband, who'd burned his hands trying to save his ledgers. Ruby treated him without comment, professional and competent. She felt Mrs. Hartwell watching her, saw something shift in the woman's expression, not quite approval, but a reassessment perhaps. Thank you. Mr. Hartwell said when Ruby finished wrapping his hands. Clay was right to praise your skills. Clay praises her, Mrs. Hartwell's voice held surprise. Her husband chuckled, wincing as it pulled at sore lungs. Couldn't stop talking about her efficiency while we fought the fire. Said Miss Talbot could probably organize the flames into retreat if given half a chance. Ruby glanced at Clay, who was helping Tom treat a burn on Joe's shoulder. He didn't look her way, but she saw the color rise on the back of his neck. As the evening wore on, more townspeople arrived, some injured, some just seeking news and comfort. Ruby fed them all, her kitchen becoming a hub of activity. She noticed the whispers had a different quality now, less scandalized, more curious. When the last visitor left near midnight, Ruby surveyed the wreckage of her normally tidy domain. Dishes piled high, supplies scattered, ash tracked across the floor. Clay appeared in the doorway, exhaustion written in every line of his body. Sit, Ruby commanded. I'll heat something for you. You've done enough. Clay Blackridge, sit down before you fall down. He sat. Ruby heated leftover stew, sliced fresh bread, poured coffee that had been keeping warm. She placed it before him, then surprised herself by sitting beside him rather than across. Thank you, he said simply. You were magnificent today. I did what needed doing. No. He turned to face her. You did more. You showed them who you really are, not the fallen woman they whispered about, but the one who tends their hurts without judgment. He paused. The one who tends mine. Ruby found she couldn't look away from his eyes. Clay? I meant what I said earlier. about standing by you. This is your home now. If you want it, let them talk. We know the truth." "What truth is that?" His hand covered hers on the table, work rough and warm. "That you saved me, not just today, but every day since you arrived. That's truth enough for anyone." They sat like that, hands touching, while the kitchen settled around them. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance, answered by another. But inside was warmth and light, and the beginning of something neither quite dared name. Finally, Ruby stood, gently pulling her hand free. "You need rest. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." "It will," Clay agreed, standing as well. "But we'll face them together." "Together," Ruby confirmed. As she climbed the stairs to her room, and it was hers now, she realized, truly hers, Ruby thought about the day's events. The whispers would continue, she knew, but they'd lost some of their power today, diluted by actions that spoke louder than gossip ever could. She'd come to Red Pines seeking refuge. What she'd found was something more, a place to stand. Work that mattered. A man who saw her truly. Not bad for a fallen woman, she thought with a small smile. Through her window, she could see lights still burning in town where people worked to repair the damage. Tomorrow, she'd send bread and preserves with Clay, a gesture of community. Tomorrow, she'd face the whispers with her chin high. But tonight, she touched the place where Clay's hand had covered hers and allowed herself to hope. The letter lay on the kitchen table like an accusation, though Clay hadn't meant it that way. He'd found it while cleaning out the desk in his study, tucked between ledgers from 2 years past. Now he watched Ruby read it, saw her face pale as she recognized Abigail's handwriting. "I thought you should see it," he said quietly. Ruby set the letter down with trembling fingers. It was dated just a week before Abigail's death, addressed to a Mary Sullivan in San Francisco, never sent, perhaps forgotten in the illness that came so suddenly. Asterisk, Dear Mary. It read, Asterisk, I hope this letter finds you well. I write with an unusual request regarding your former neighbor, Miss Ruby Talbot. As you mentioned in your last correspondence, she has faced trials no woman should endure. The loss of her child, the betrayal by that scoundrel Morrison, the cruel judgment of those who should have shown Christian charity, my heart aches for her. Asterisk, I have written to her, offering employment here at Red Pines. Clay doesn't know yet, you know how men can be about change, but I feel in my bones that this is right. He'll need someone when I'm gone. And she needs a place to heal. Sometimes God works through ordinary correspondence. Don't you think, Asterisk? I've been feeling poorly lately, though I haven't told Clay. The doctor says it's nothing, but I know my own body. If something should happen, please know that bringing Ruby here was my last gift to my husband. He just doesn't know it yet. Ruby's hand went to her throat. She knew she was dying. Seems so. Clay moved to the stove, needing something to do with his hands. Mary sent it back with a note explaining she'd only just received it. Thought I should have it. The loss of her child, Ruby whispered, then looked up sharply. Clay, You don't owe me any explanations. He kept his back to her, pouring coffee with excessive care. Your past is your own. No, her voice was stronger now. Not anymore. Not if we're to go forward with any kind of trust between us. He turned then, seeing her sitting straight-backed at his table, chin raised despite the tears tracking down her cheeks. Beautiful in her courage, he thought, then pushed the notion aside. Ruby took a shaky breath. I was with James Morrison for 2 years. Not married, he always had excuses for delays. But I loved him, or thought I did. When I realized I was carrying his child, I was frightened but happy. Thought surely now he'd marry me. Her laugh was bitter. Instead, he accused me of trying to trap him, said the child could be anyone's. The other women he was seeing came forward then, comparing notes, finding they'd all heard the same promises. Clay's hands clenched around his cup, but he stayed silent. I lost the baby at 4 months. The doctor said it was the strain, the shame. Maybe he was right. Ruby wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. After that, I couldn't stay. Everywhere I went, I was the cautionary tale mothers told their daughters. So when Abigail's letter came, offering me a position sight unseen, it felt like salvation. It was, Clay said firmly. Whatever her reasons, Abby was right to bring you here. Ruby stood abruptly, moving to the window. Was she? I've brought gossip to your door, complications you don't need. You've brought life back to this house. Clay set his cup down harder than necessary. You want to know what Abby's real gift was? Not just hiring help, I could have managed that myself eventually. She found someone who'd understand grief without trying to fix it. Someone who'd let me be broken while I figured out how to heal. Ruby turned to face him. You're not broken. Neither are you. They stood there, the kitchen stretching between them, charged with understanding. Then Ruby noticed something else on the table, a second envelope. Official-looking. What's that? Clay grimaced. Letter from my sister Sarah in California. She's coming for Christmas. Wants to see how I'm managing. That's wonderful, Ruby said, though she felt a flutter of anxiety. Family visits meant scrutiny. Questions about her position here. Is it? Clay ran a hand through his hair. Sarah's protective. She'll have opinions about our arrangement. Then we'll face them together, Ruby said, echoing his words from days before. When does she arrive? 3 weeks. She's bringing her husband and their 2 boys. He paused. Ruby, I need to ask something of you. It might not be proper. Since when have we worried about proper? She asked wryly. That drew a small smile. Fair point. Would you stay on through their visit? Help with the cooking, the preparations. I know it's beyond your usual duties. Clay, she moved back to the table, closer to him. This is my home now. Of course I'll help. The relief on his face was almost comical. I'll pay extra. You'll do no such thing. Ruby picked up both letters, folding them carefully. Family doesn't charge family for holiday help. The word hung between them, family. Not employer and employee, not even friends, but something else, something that defied easy classification. Clay cleared his throat. We'll need to prepare the guest rooms. And Sarah's boys are hellions 8 and 10. Last I heard, they'll need entertainment. I raised 3 younger brothers, Ruby said. I think I can manage 2 boys. Ruby? Clay caught her hand as she turned away. What Abby wrote about me needing someone after she was gone, I want you to know it's more than that now. You're not just here because she thought I needed help. You're here because you belong here. Ruby looked down at their joined hands, his sun-dark and scarred, hers pale with small burns from kitchen work. Such different lives that had somehow converged in this kitchen, this moment. I know, she said softly. I feel it too. He squeezed her hand once, then let go. The moment passed, but the warmth lingered. Over the next days, they threw themselves into preparation. Ruby attacked the house with determined energy. Airing rooms closed since Abigail's death, washing curtains, polishing furniture until it gleamed. Clay repaired loose floorboards, painted the guest room, fixed the sticky window in the room the boys would share. They worked in companionable rhythm, sometimes together, sometimes apart. In the evenings, they'd sit by the fire and plan meals to prepare, activities for the children, ways to make the ranch welcoming for city visitors. Sarah lives in San Francisco now, Clay said one evening, looking at her latest letter. Her husband's in shipping, done well for himself, apparently. You sound proud. I am. Sarah deserved good things after... He stopped, frowning at old memories. Our parents died when she was 12. I was 22, just married to Abby. We took her in, raised her. She was the child we couldn't have. In a way, Ruby thought of Abigail's letter. The mention of childlessness. So much grief in this house. So many empty spaces where love should have flourished. She'll want to see that you're happy, Ruby observed. I am happy, Clay said, then looked surprised at his own words. Happier than I've been in months. Anyway. Good. Ruby bent back to her mending, hiding her pleased smile. Then we have nothing to worry about. But worry crept in anyway as Christmas approached. Ruby found herself checking her appearance more carefully, practicing conversations in her head. What would she tell Sarah about her past? How would she explain her presence without revealing too much? The morning Sarah was due to arrive. Ruby woke to find snow falling fat, lazy flakes that transformed the ranch into something from a fairy tale. She dressed carefully in her best dress, a deep green wool that complemented her coloring. Silly to care so much, but first impressions mattered. She found Clay in the kitchen, wearing his good suit and looking uncomfortable. Coffee, she offered. Please, and maybe something stronger if this keeps up. Ruby smiled at his nerves. She's your sister, not a judge. Sometimes they're the same thing. But he smiled back, tension easing slightly. You look nice. The green suits you. Before Ruby could respond, they heard the jingle of harness outside. Clay straightened like a soldier heading to battle. They're here. Go, Ruby said gently. I'll prepare coffee and the cakes I made yesterday. Give you time to greet them properly. Clay squeezed her shoulder as he passed a brief touch, but it steadied them both. Ruby busied herself with the refreshments, listening to the voices in the yard, Clay's deep rumble, a woman's delighted exclamations, children's excited chatter. When they entered, Ruby's first impression was that Sarah looked like a feminine version of Clay, same gray eyes, same determined chin, but with a softer edge. Her husband, Richard, was tall and scholarly looking, with kind eyes behind wire spectacles. The boys tumbled in like puppies, all energy and noise. You must be Miss Talbot, Sarah said, extending her hand. Her gaze was assessing but not unkind. Clay's letters have mentioned you. Good things, I hope, Ruby said, returning the handshake firmly. He says you've saved his life, Sarah said bluntly. I wanted to thank you for that. Ruby felt heat rise in her cheeks. I've simply done my job. No, Sarah's voice was firm. I know my brother. I know what he was like after Abby died. The fact that he's writing letters again, that this house feels alive, that's more than a job. That's a miracle. Sarah, Clay protested, but his sister waved him off. Hush. Let me embarrass you properly. It's a sister's prerogative. She turned back to Ruby. Now, tell me about yourself. Clay's letters were frustratingly vague on details. Ruby had prepared for this, had her story ready. But looking into Sarah's eyes so like Clay's, so genuinely interested, she found herself speaking more truthfully than planned. I came from Riverside, seeking a new position. Mrs. Blackridge had written to me just before her passing. Clay was kind enough to honor her offer. And before Riverside, Sarah pressed gently. I was raised in Nebraska. My parents farmed there until the drought took everything. Ruby kept her voice steady. We all scattered after that, seeking work where we could find it. It was true enough, if incomplete. Sarah seemed to sense there was more, but didn't push. Instead, she smiled warmly. Well, we're glad you scattered in this direction. Now, are those apple cakes I smell? The boys will be impossible if they don't get something sweet soon. The afternoon passed in pleasant chaos. The boys, Thomas and Daniel, explored every corner of the house, peppered Ruby with questions, and devoured enough food for grown men. Richard and Clay discussed business and ranching while Sarah helped Ruby in the kitchen, the two women finding an easy rhythm. You love him, Sarah said quietly as they prepared supper together. Ruby's hands stilled on the potatoes she was peeling. It's all right. I'm glad. Sarah touched her arm gently. He needs someone who sees him as he is now. Not as he was with Abby. You do that.
It's not. We haven't.
Ruby struggled for words.
Nothing improper has happened.
Sarah laughed. Oh, honey, love isn't improper. And Clay's too honorable to do anything without making it right first. But he will,
make it right. He's already halfway there. I can see it in how he looks at you.
Ruby resumed peeling, her mind whirling.
Was it so obvious? And if it was, what did that mean for their carefully maintained boundaries?
That evening, after a supper filled with laughter and stories, they all gathered in the parlor. The boys played with toy soldiers Richard had brought while the adults talked. Ruby noticed how Clay had relaxed, how his smile came easier with family around.
Uncle Clay, Thomas said suddenly, are you going to marry Miss Ruby?
The room went silent. Ruby felt her face flame. Clay looked like he'd swallowed his coffee wrong.
Thomas,
Sarah scolded.
That's not polite.
But Ma, you said Uncle Clay was sweet on her, and Pa said it was about time, and
Thomas James Harrison. That is quite enough.
Sarah's face was nearly as red as Ruby's. Apologize this instant.
Sorry,
the boy mumbled, not looking sorry at all. Clay cleared his throat. Boys, why don't you help me check the horses? Make sure they're settled for the night.
After they left,
Sarah turned to Ruby with mortified eyes.
I'm so sorry. Children have no filter.
It's fine, Ruby said, though her heart was still racing.
Children often see things adults pretend aren't there.
Yes, Sarah said thoughtfully.
They do.
Later, after the house had settled for the night, Ruby found herself unable to sleep. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and made her way to the kitchen for warm milk. She found Clay there, staring out at the snow-covered yard.
Couldn't sleep either,
she asked softly. He turned, offering a rueful smile. Too much excitement for one day. Ruby heated milk for both of them, adding a touch of honey and vanilla. They sat at the table, the kitchen warm and quiet around them. I'm sorry about Thomas, Clay said eventually. Kids say the most awkward things. Do they? Ruby looked at him steadily. Or do they just say what everyone else is thinking? Clay met her gaze. Ruby.
I know, she said quickly. I know all the reasons why it's impossible. My past, the gossip, the impropriety of it all, I know. But Clay...
She took a breath, gathering courage.
What if those aren't good enough reasons anymore?
He reached across the table, taking her hand. They never were good enough reasons. I just thought I needed more time. To grieve. To be sure I wasn't just reaching for comfort. His thumb traced circles on her palm. But it's been months now, and every day I'm more certain. This isn't about comfort or convenience or loneliness. This is about you. About us. Ruby turned her hand to intertwine their fingers.
So what do we do?
I don't know. Clay admitted. But I think we start by being honest. With ourselves, with each other. With Sarah, if you're willing.
And after they leave, we figure out the rest. Together.
He squeezed her hand.
If you'll have me, broken parts and all. Only if you'll have me, Ruby said. Scandalous past and all.
They sat like that, hands clasped across the table, while snow continued to fall outside. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, Sarah's questions, the boys' energy, the complexity of families blending. But tonight, in the quiet kitchen where so much of their story had unfolded, Ruby and Clay chose each other. It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't even a declaration, but it was a promise, as binding as any vow, made in the place that had become their heart's home. The letter that had started it all, Abigail's final gift, lay in the drawer nearby. Its purpose, finally, fully realized. The young foal arrived on a bitter December evening. 3 days after Sarah's family had returned to California, Tom Muller had found it by the creek, weak and abandoned, its mother nowhere to be seen. He'd brought it straight to the barn, knowing Clay would want to try saving it despite the poor odds. Too young, Clay said, examining the foal by lantern light. Can't be more than a few days old. Without its mother. Ruby had come out when she heard the commotion, wrapping her shawl tight against the cold. She looked at the small creature shivering on the straw, its dark coat still damp from the snow. Something twisted in her chest, a familiar ache she usually kept buried. "We have to try," she heard herself say. Clay glanced at her, perhaps hearing something in her voice. "It'll mean round-the-clock feeding, warming. Might not make it anyway." "I know." Ruby knelt beside the foal, running gentle hands over its trembling sides. "I'll take the night watches." "Ruby? Please." She looked up at him, knowing her eyes revealed too much but unable to hide it. "Let me do this." Clay studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Tom, help me rig up a warming box. Joe, see if Mrs. Patterson in town still has that goat we'll need milk. Eddie, bring all the clean blankets you can find." The men scattered with purpose. Clay crouched beside Ruby, his voice low. "You sure about this?" "I've done it before," she said, which was true. What she didn't say was that she'd done it on her parents' farm when she was 12, that she'd slept in the barn for 2 weeks straight, that the foal had lived and grown strong. That success had nothing to do with why she needed to try now. They worked together to create a makeshift stall in the warmest corner of the barn. Clay showed Ruby how to mix the goat's milk with honey and egg yolk, how to fashion a feeding bottle from leather and cloth. Their hands brushed as they worked, but the touch was incidental, their focus entirely on the small life fighting to survive. By midnight, the foal had taken its first real feeding. Ruby sat in the straw, the baby's head in her lap, coaxing it to swallow. Clay had tried to leave twice, but kept finding reasons to stay adjusting the lantern, adding more straw, checking the temperature. "You should get some rest," Ruby said without looking up. "Morning comes early." "So should you." "I told you, I'll take the night watch." She stroked the foal's neck, feeling the weak pulse beneath her fingers. "I need to do this. Clay, please don't ask me why." He was quiet for so long she thought he'd left. Then straw rustled as he settled beside her, not touching but close enough she could feel his warmth. "When Sarah was 14, he said quietly. "She got it in her head to raise rabbits, bought a breeding pair with her saved money, built hutches, had grand plans for a fur business. Then dogs got into the hutches one night, killed everything." Ruby's hand stilled on the foal's neck. "She didn't cry," Clay continued. "Not one tear, just cleaned up the mess, took down the hutches, never mentioned rabbits again. But Abby found her that night, sitting in the ruins of her little business, holding one of the babies that had somehow survived. She sat there all night, trying to keep it warm, trying to feed it sugar water. It died just before dawn." "Did she cry then?" Ruby's voice was barely a whisper. "No, she just wrapped it in her good handkerchief and buried it behind the garden. Planted wildflowers there the next spring. Never said why." Clay shifted, his shoulder touching hers. "Sometimes we need to try, even when trying hurts worse than not trying. Sometimes, especially then." Ruby closed her eyes, feeling tears threaten. The foal made a small sound, nudging weakly at her hand. She dipped the cloth in milk again, letting it suckle. "Her name was going to be Grace," she said, the words coming without her permission. "I know it's foolish, naming something that was never born, but I couldn't help it. James said—" She stopped, swallowed. "He said I was being dramatic, that it was just nature taking its course. But she was real to me. For 4 months, she was real." Clay's arm came around her, careful and gentle. Of course she was real. "I never got to hold her," Ruby continued, the words flowing now like water through a broken dam. "Never got to try to save her. The doctor said it was quick, that she didn't suffer, but how could he know? How could anyone know?" She was crying now, silent tears that she'd held back for over a year. "So when I see something small and helpless fighting to live, you need to fight for it." Clay finished, I understand. They sat like that through the long night, taking turns feeding the foal, keeping it warm. Ruby dozed against Clay's shoulder between feedings. He told her stories of the ranch, of Abby's first attempts at gardening, of Sarah's childhood adventures, safe stories that required no response. Just let her rest in the comfort of his voice. As dawn approached, the foal began to show more strength. It tried to stand, wobbly legs splaying before folding again. But the effort was there, the will to live evident in its dark eyes. "There you go," Ruby encouraged, steadying it with gentle hands. "That's it, little one. You're going to make it." "Thanks to you," Clay said. He'd moved to prepare another feeding, but she could feel him watching her. "Ruby, what you said about grace. I shouldn't have burdened you with that." "It's not a burden," he came back, crouched beside her. "It's trust. Do you know how long it's been since someone trusted me with their real pain, not the polite version, not the socially acceptable grief, but the raw truth of it?" Ruby looked at him, seeing her own loss reflected in his eyes. Since Abby. He reached out, wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Thank you for trusting me." The barn door creaked open. Tom Miller peered in, looking unsurprised to find them both there. "Morning, boss. Miss Ruby. How's the patient?" "Fighting," Clay said, standing and offering Ruby a hand up. "Tom, can you take over for a bit? Miss Ruby needs breakfast and proper rest." Ruby wanted to protest, but exhaustion was hitting her all at once. She let Clay guide her to the house, his hand warm on her elbow. In the kitchen, he insisted she sit while he made coffee and warmed biscuits from yesterday. "You should sleep," he said, setting food before her. "So should you." "I've survived on less." He sat across from her, his own coffee steaming. "Ruby, I need to say something, and I need you to really hear it." She nodded, suddenly nervous. "Last night, in the barn, that was the most real anyone's been with me in years, including myself." He stared into his coffee as if it held answers. "I've been walking around half alive, going through the motions, pretending that was enough. Then you showed up and suddenly I had to feel things again, want things again." "Clay, let me finish." He looked up, gray eyes intense. "I thought I was protecting Abby's memory by staying frozen. But watching you with that foal, seeing you fight for life even when it hurts, I realized Abby would hate what I've become. She was always the one pushing forward, finding hope in impossible places." His voice roughened, like writing to a stranger in Riverside, believing she'd be exactly what was needed. Ruby reached across the table, taking his hand. She was right. "Yes," Clay said simply. She was. They sat like that as the kitchen brightened with the morning sun. Outside, they could hear the ranch awakening Tom calling to Joe, Eddie whistling as he worked. Normal sounds of a life continuing. "The foal needs a name," Ruby said eventually. "If it's going to live, it needs a name." Clay smiled, the expression transforming his face. "What would you call her? And yes, before you ask, I checked it's a her." Ruby thought for a moment. "Hope," she said finally. "It's what she represents. Isn't it that sometimes, against all odds, life finds a way?" "Hope it is." Clay squeezed her hand. "Fitting for more than just the foal." Over the next week, Hope grew stronger under Ruby's care. She took her turns with the feeding, but the men all pitched in, charmed by the little filly who greeted everyone with increasingly energetic headbutts. The barn became a gathering place in the evenings, everyone finding excuses to check on the patient. It was Eddie who noticed first. "She's attached to you, Miss Ruby. Look how she settles when you're near." It was true. Hope would fuss and fidget for the others, but calmed immediately when Ruby appeared. She'd follow Ruby around the stall on increasingly steady legs, butting at her skirts for attention. "Knows her mama," Tom said approvingly. Ruby flushed. "I'm not—" "Sure you are," Joe interrupted with rare verbosity. Maybe not by birth, but by choice. That's what matters. On the 10th night, Ruby arrived for her watch to find the stall decorated with pine boughs and ribbon. A small sign hung on the gate. Hope's stall, no admission without treats. Eddie's work, Clay said, appearing beside her. Boy's got a sentimental streak. It's perfect. Ruby smiled, touching the sign. She's really going to make it, isn't she? Thanks to you. Clay moved closer, his hand settling on her waist with new familiarity. Over the past days, the careful distance between them had gradually dissolved. Small touches had become commonplace, his hand on her back as they passed in doorways, her fingers brushing his as she served dinner. Ruby, I've been thinking. Dangerous habit, she teased, but her heart rate quickened. Spring will come eventually. Hope will be weaned, strong enough to join the herd. He paused. I'd like you to have her. Ruby turned to face him fully. Clay, I couldn't. She's yours already, in every way that counts. Besides, his voice dropped, becoming rougher. I'm hoping by spring you'll have reason to stay permanent-like. The kind of reason that makes a horse a wedding gift instead of wages. The word hung between them, wedding. Not implied, not danced around, but spoken plain. Is that a proposal, Clay Blackridge? Ruby's voice was barely steady. Not yet, he said, framing her face with gentle hands. When I propose, you'll know it. There'll be words said proper, maybe even a ring if I can manage it. But I wanted you to know my intentions. Wanted you to know that every day you're here, every meal we share, every time you trust me with another piece of your heart, it's all leading somewhere. Somewhere permanent. Ruby covered his hands with hers. I know. I've known for a while now. And his eyes searched hers, vulnerable despite his certainty. And I'll be here come spring, come summer, come whatever season you decide to make those proper words. She turned her head to kiss his palm. Hope's not the only one who's found where she belongs. He kissed her then, there in the barn with Hope watching and the lantern casting golden light. It was their first real kiss, unhurried and sure, full of promise and understanding. When they parted, both breathing unsteadily, Ruby laughed softly. The hands will be impossible now. Let them, Clay said, resting his forehead against hers. I'm tired of pretending this is just about employment, tired of watching you from across rooms when all I want is to be beside you. No more pretending, Ruby agreed. They spent that night as they had the first sitting in the straw, taking turns with feedings, sharing stories in the lamp-lit darkness. But now Clay's arm stayed around her, and Ruby's head found its home on his shoulder between duties. Hope thrived, as if sensing the happiness surrounding her. And in the warm circle of lantern light, two wounded hearts continued their own healing, no longer alone in the necessary work of living. The storm announced itself with a wall of black clouds rolling in from the mountains. By early afternoon, the temperature had plummeted and the first snowflakes were falling, not the gentle drift of previous snows, but hard, icy pellets driven sideways by howling wind. Clay burst into the kitchen where Ruby was preparing bread for the next day. This is going to be bad. Need to get the stock into shelter fast. She could see the worry in his eyes. They'd had a mild winter so far, but this had the look of a true blizzard. What do you need me to do? Keep the house warm. Prepare for the worst. If we lose men out there. He stopped, shook his head. Just be ready. He grabbed extra rope from the pantry, and Ruby caught his arm. Be careful. Always am. He pressed a quick kiss to her forehead, a liberty he'd only recently begun taking and was gone. Ruby threw herself into preparations. She stoked the stoves, filled every available container with water in case the pump froze, gathered medical supplies. Through the kitchen window, she could barely make out the shapes of men driving cattle toward the barn, fighting against the wind. By 4 o'clock, full dark had fallen, though sunset was hours away. The storm had become a monster, rattling windows and sending snow through every tiny gap. Ruby kept coffee hot and soup ready. knowing the men would need both when they came in. The kitchen door slammed open. Tom Muller stumbled in, ice coating his beard.
"Miss Ruby, there's trouble."
Her heart clenched.
"Clay."
"He's all right, but Eddie Foolboy went after a calf that got separated. Can't find him in this mess. Boss and Joe are still searching, but visibility's near nothing." Ruby was already reaching for her heaviest coat.
"Which direction?" "Now, miss, you can't—"
"Which direction? Tom." Her voice brooked no argument. "North pasture, near the big cottonwood. But mister, Clay would have my hide if I let you." Ruby was already wrapping scarves around her face, tucking her skirts into heavy boots.
"Then don't let me. Stay here, keep the fires going. Someone needs to be ready when they get back."
She took a lantern and rope, tying one end to the porch rail as she'd seen Clay do in bad weather. The wind hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and nearly knocking her down. She put her head down and pushed forward, following the fence line north. The world had become a howling void of white. Ruby couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, could barely hear her own thoughts over the storm's rage. She thought of Eddie Young, eager Eddie who'd just received word that his sweetheart back in Missouri had agreed to marry him. He'd been walking on air for days.
"Eddie,"
she called, knowing the wind would swallow her voice, but trying anyway. "Eddie Crane." She nearly missed the dark shape huddled against the fence. At first she thought it was a drift, but something made her investigate closer. Eddie was curled in a ball. The calf he'd saved pressed against his chest, both of them rapidly being buried by snow.
"Eddie."
Ruby dropped beside him, shaking his shoulder. He stirred slightly, mumbling something she couldn't hear.
"Alive. Thank God, but she'd never get him back alone. He was nearly twice her weight and clearly hypothermic."
She did the only thing she could think of, wrapping the rope around Eddie and securing it. She took the calf bawling and struggling despite its weakness and started back the way she'd come, pulling the rope to keep her direction. Every few feet she tugged hard on the section around Eddie, hoping movement would keep him conscious. The return journey was a nightmare of wind and cold and the terrible weight of responsibility. The calf fought her. Eddie's responses grew weaker, and more than once Ruby thought she'd lost the fence line. Her world narrowed to the next step, the next pull on the rope, the next breath that the wind tried to steal. Then hands were reaching for her, voices shouting. Clay materialized from the white void, his face a mask of ice and fear. "Ruby, what the—"
"Eddie,"
she gasped, pointing back.
"On the rope! Alive!"
Clay and Joe plunged past her, following the lifeline she'd created. Tom took the calf while Ruby stumbled toward the blessed warmth of the kitchen. She collapsed on a chair, shaking uncontrollably, ice melting from her hair and clothes. Minutes later, or hours, she couldn't tell, the men burst in carrying Eddie between them. His lips were blue, his breathing shallow, but he was conscious enough to mutter about the damn calf.
"Get him near the fire,"
Ruby ordered, pushing through her own exhaustion. "Not too close, gradual warming.
"Tom, heat water for baths. Joe, blankets from the cedar chest."
She worked with practiced efficiency, stripping Eddie's frozen clothes, wrapping him in layers of wool. Clay worked beside her, their movements coordinated without need for words. Slowly, color returned to the boy's face.
"Miss Ruby,"
Eddie's teeth chattered.
Did the calf—"
"The calf's fine," she assured him. "Warming up in the barn as we speak. That was foolish. Eddie Crane." "I know." His smile was sheepish. "But I couldn't just leave it." Ruby smoothed his hair back, maternal despite being only a few years older. "I understand. Rest now." When Eddie was settled on a makeshift bed near the stove, covered in every blanket they could find, Clay finally turned to Ruby. His expression was unreadable anger, fear, relief all warring in his eyes. "You could have died," he said quietly.
"So could Eddie."
"Ruby, would you have left him?" She met his gaze steadily. "If you'd found him." Would you have left him to go get help? Clay's jaw worked. That's different. Why? Because you're a man. Because it's your ranch. Ruby stood, exhaustion making her bold. This is my home too. Clay, these people are my responsibility too. I won't stand by when I can help. Even if it means, his voice cracked, even if it means I could lose you. The raw emotion in his words stopped her short. Clay. He pulled her against him suddenly, holding her tight enough to hurt. She could feel him trembling from cold or fear. She wasn't sure. When Tom said you'd gone out there, I thought I can't do it again. Ruby, I can't lose someone else. He stopped, but she heard the unfinished word. Love. Someone else I love. You won't, she whispered against his chest. I'm too stubborn to die in a blizzard. That startled a laugh from him. Rough but genuine. That you are... He pulled back enough to see her face. You saved him. You saved that fool boy's life. We all saved him, Ruby corrected. That's what families do. Clay kissed her then, not gentle like before, but desperate, as if assuring himself she was real and whole and there. When they parted, Tom had diplomatically turned his back, busying himself with the stove. Boss, Joe said from his post by Eddie's bed. Storm's getting worse. Might be stuck here a day or two. Clay nodded, still holding Ruby. We've supplies enough. Everyone stays put until it breaks. He looked down at her. That means you too. No more rescue missions. Only if you make the same promise. Ruby countered. Deal. The storm raged for 2 full days. They turned the kitchen into a dormitory of sorts, everyone sleeping in shifts to tend the fires and check on Eddie. Ruby kept them fed with hearty soups and fresh bread. The kitchen warm and lamp-lit against the howling darkness outside. It was during the second night, while she sat up with Eddie, that he spoke what others had been thinking. You love him, don't you? His voice was stronger now. The danger passed. Mr. Clay, I mean... Ruby paused in her knitting. That's rather personal, Eddie. Sorry, miss, it's just we all see it, how you two are together, like my parents were, before Pa died. Like you fit. He shifted under his blankets. I'm glad, mister. Clay deserves to be happy again. So do you. Thank you, Ruby said softly. That means more than you know. Miss Ruby, when I marry Susan, if I marry her, after she hears what a fool thing I did, would you help with the cooking? For the wedding feast, Susan's heard about your pies from my letters. Ruby smiled. I would be honored. Eddie, though I suspect Susan will forgive you. Women tend to forgive men who risk themselves for helpless creatures. You think so? I know so. When the storm finally broke on the 3rd morning, it revealed a world transformed. Drifts reached the eaves in places. Fences were buried. Trees bent double under the weight of ice. But the sun shone brilliant on the pristine white, and the ranch had survived intact. Clay and the men dug paths to the barn, checked on the animals. All were accounted for, including Eddie's calf, who had apparently adopted Hope as a surrogate mother. Ruby watched from the window as Clay worked, noting how he kept glancing back at the house, as if assuring himself it was still there. That evening, after the men had returned to the bunkhouse and Eddie had been helped to his own bed there, Clay and Ruby were alone in the kitchen. She was washing dishes. He was pretending to read a newspaper, but mostly watching her. Say it, she said without turning around. Say what? Whatever's been building in you all day. You've started to speak a dozen times. She heard his chair scrape back, felt him come up behind her. His hands settled on her waist, warm and familiar. I've been thinking about fear, he said quietly. About how I've let it rule me since Abby died. Fear of feeling. Fear of loss. Fear of letting anyone close enough to hurt me again. Ruby set down the dish she was washing, waited. Then you walked into that storm, and I felt fear like I've never known, not even when... He paused, swallowed. I realized something. The fear of losing you is already there. whether I admit loving you or not. The only question is whether I get the joy too, or just the fear." Ruby turned in his arms, soap suds still on her hands. "And what have you decided?" "I've decided," Clay said, framing her face with his hands, "that I'm done being ruled by fear. I'm done pretending this is temporary or convenient or anything other than what it is." "Which is love," he said simply. "Plain, complicated, terrifying, wonderful love. I love you, Ruby Talbot. I should have said it before you walked into that storm. Should have said it a dozen times over. I'm saying it now." Ruby's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too. Have for a while now. I think maybe since that night with Dancer, when you trusted me with your grief." "Marry me," Clay said suddenly. "Not someday. Not in spring. Soon as we can get to town. Soon as Reverend Morrison can say the words. I don't want to waste any more time." "Clay, I know it's fast. I know people will talk. I don't care. I almost lost you to that storm. And all I could think was how many days I'd wasted not telling you how I feel. Not making you mine in every way that matters." His thumbs brushed away her tears. "Say yes, Ruby. Say you'll marry a broken-down rancher who comes with too much past and a ranch full of adopted strays." "Yes," Ruby said, laughing through her tears. "Yes to all of it. The ranch, the strays, the past, the future. Yes." He kissed her then, long and sweet, while outside the winter sun set over their snow-changed world. When they finally parted, Ruby rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Abigail would be glad," she said softly. "She knew," Clay replied, his voice rumbling under her ear. "Somehow, she knew what we'd be to each other. Her last gift to both of us." They stood there in the kitchen where so much of their story had unfolded, holding each other as darkness fell. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, wedding plans, telling the men, facing the town's reaction, but tonight they had warmth and safety and declarations finally spoken. Through the window, Ruby could see lantern light from the bunkhouse where Eddie was probably regaling Tom and Joe with his dramatic rescue. In the barn, Hope and her adopted calf friend were settling for the night. And here in the kitchen, two people who'd found each other across loss and distance were beginning to plan a life together. The storm had passed, leaving the world clean and new. And in its wake, love had finally been named, claimed, and promised. It was, Ruby thought as Clay held her close, worth every frightening step into the white unknown. The night after their engagement, Ruby couldn't sleep, not from worry or doubt, but from a restless energy that had her pacing her room, touching objects as if seeing them anew. Tomorrow, Clay would take her to town to speak with Reverend Morrison about the wedding. Tonight, she was suspended between her old life and the new. Neither Miss Talbot the cook nor Mrs. Blackridge the wife. A soft tap at her door made her heart jump. "Ruby," Clay's voice, low and uncertain. "I saw your light." She opened the door to find him in his nightshirt and trousers, hair mussed, looking oddly vulnerable. Couldn't sleep either. Too much thinking. He gestured toward the stairs. "Would you... That is, it's not proper, but..." "When have we ever worried about proper?" Ruby grabbed her shawl. "Come on." They made their way to the kitchen, always the kitchen, their safe harbor. Clay built up the fire while Ruby heated milk. Neither spoke until they were seated at their usual spots, hands wrapped around warm cups. "Second thoughts?" Clay asked, not quite meeting her eyes. "No." Ruby reached across to touch his hand. "You?" "No, just..." He turned his cup in circles. "I keep thinking about Abby. Not the way you might think," he added quickly. "I mean, wondering if she'd approve. If I'm betraying her memory by being happy again." Ruby considered her words carefully. "I think Abby knew exactly what she was doing when she wrote to me. I think she loved you enough to want your happiness, even if she couldn't be part of it." "I want to believe that." Clay's fingers interlaced with hers. She was so much stronger than me in many ways. Faced her illness without complaint. Made arrangements. He smiled sadly. Even arranged for her replacement, apparently. Not replacement, Ruby corrected gently. Successor, maybe. But Clay, what we have isn't the same as what you had with Abby. It doesn't need to be. Love isn't a limited resource that runs out. He squeezed her hand. When did you get so wise? Somewhere between burning your eggs and fighting blizzards, I suppose. That earned her a real smile. Those first weeks were interesting. You were so wary, Ruby remembered. Like a wounded animal, all grief and suspicion. And you were so contained, proper, hiding everything behind efficiency. He studied her face in the firelight. When did that change? The night with Dancer, Ruby said without hesitation. When you let me see you cry. When you didn't judge me for my past. For me, it was earlier. Clay admitted. That morning I found you asleep by the fire. You'd kicked off your shoes and your hair was coming loose. And you looked unguarded, human, beautiful. Ruby felt heat rise in her cheeks. Clay Blackridge, are you courting me after proposing? Maybe I am. His thumb traced circles on her palm. We did things backward. Didn't we live together before courting? Got engaged before I even kissed you proper. Nothing about us has been conventional. No. His expression grew serious. Ruby, I need you to know something. When we marry, I won't expect you to be Abby. I won't compare or wish for things to be how they were. You're not a substitute or a second choice. You're my choice, full and complete. Tears pricked Ruby's eyes. And you're mine, not because I needed saving or shelter, but because you're you, stubborn and kind and terrible at cooking. I'm not that bad. You burned water. Clay, water. They laughed quietly, mindful of the sleeping house. Then Clay stood, pulling her up with him. Dance with me. What, here now? Why not? He positioned her hands properly, one on his shoulder, one in his. I haven't danced since, well, too long, and I want to dance with my future wife. They moved slowly around the kitchen, no music but the crackling fire and the settling house. Clay hummed something low and tuneless, and Ruby let herself be led, let herself lean into his solid warmth. I love you, he murmured against her hair. I'll probably say it too much now, making up for lost time. Never too much, Ruby assured him. They danced until the fire burned low, then sat together on the worn sofa in the parlor. Ruby tucked against Clay's side. She must have dozed, because suddenly gray dawn light was filtering through the windows, and Clay was gently shaking her shoulder. We fell asleep, he said unnecessarily. Ruby sat up, noting they were still decorously arranged, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her. The men will talk. Let them. We're engaged. But he helped her to her feet, straightening her shawl with careful hands. I'll start breakfast while that is, while I make myself presentable. Ruby smiled at his sudden shyness. Clay last night was perfect. The tension left his shoulders. It was, wasn't it? When the hands arrived for breakfast, they took one look at Clay's unusually cheerful demeanor and Ruby's slight blush and exchanged knowing grins. Sleep well, boss? Tom asked innocently. Very well, thanks. Clay's tone dared anyone to comment further. Eddie, still moving carefully from his ordeal, was less circumspect. So when's the wedding, Susan will want to know. She's already planning what to wear when she visits. Ruby and Clay exchanged glances. Soon as we can arrange it. Clay said, probably next week, if Reverend Morrison is amenable. Joe dropped his fork. Next week, that's mighty fast. When you know, you know. Clay said simply, no point waiting. Besides, Ruby added, refilling coffee cups,
Someone needs to make an honest man of him before he burns down the kitchen trying to cook. The men laughed, tension breaking. Tom raised his cup. To the boss and soon-to-be Mrs. About time, if you ask me. Hear, hear, Eddie chimed in. After breakfast, Ruby dressed carefully for town. Her best dress, the green wool Clay liked, her hair pinned neat and proper. When she descended, Clay was waiting in his Sunday suit, the wagon ready. You look beautiful, he said, helping her up. You clean up well yourself, Mr. Blackridge. The ride to town was quiet, both lost in thought. As the buildings came into view, Ruby felt Clay tense beside her. They'll talk, he said. They always do. Ruby straightened her spine. Let them. But when they entered the church, Reverend Morrison greeted them warmly. Clay and Miss Talbot, what brings you out on this cold morning? We'd like to arrange a wedding, Clay said, his hand finding Ruby's. Soon as possible. The Reverend's eyes widened slightly, but his smile was genuine. Well now, that's wonderful news. Come into my office, both of you. An hour later, they emerged engaged to be married the following Saturday. Word spread through town like wildfire. They could see curtains twitching, people suddenly finding reasons to be on the street. Ready? Clay asked. Ruby lifted her chin. Ready? They made their stops, the general store for supplies, the seamstress to arrange alterations to Ruby's dress. At each location, reactions varied from surprise to approval to barely concealed disapproval. Mrs. Hartwell they encountered outside the milliner's. Mr. Blackridge, Miss Talbot. Her tone could have frosted windows. I hear congratulations are in order. Thank you, Clay said evenly. We're very happy. Rather sudden. Isn't it poor Abigail barely cold? Mrs. Hartwell. Clay's voice went steel hard. My late wife has been gone nearly 9 months. She was the one who brought Ruby here, and I believe she'd rejoice in our happiness. Now, if you'll excuse us. He guided Ruby past the sputtering woman, his hand protective on her back. Thank you, Ruby murmured when they were out of earshot. No one speaks to my future wife that way, Clay said firmly. No one. Their last stop was the cemetery on the hill. Clay had avoided it since the funeral, but now he led Ruby through the gate to a simple stone marked Abigail Morse Blackridge, beloved wife. They stood quietly for a moment. Then Clay spoke, his voice low. Abby, I brought someone to meet you, though I suspect you already knew all about her. He squeezed Ruby's hand. Thank you for everything, for the years we had, and for making sure I wouldn't be alone after. I'll take care of her. I promise, like you took care of me. Ruby knelt, placing a small bouquet of dried flowers from Abigail's own garden. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing what we couldn't, for being brave enough to reach out to a stranger. I'll take care of him, I promise, and the ranch, and the men, all of it. When she stood, Clay's eyes were wet. Ready to go home? Yes, Ruby said, and meant it completely. The ride back was lighter, plans spilling out between them. Who to invite, what food to prepare, where Sarah and her family would stay when they came for the ceremony. Nothing fancy, Clay said, just family and close friends. And good food, Ruby added. I won't have people saying I skimped on my own wedding feast. That evening, as Ruby prepared supper, she found herself humming. The kitchen felt different somehow, not just a place of work, but truly home. When Clay came in from evening chores, she turned to greet him and saw the same recognition in his eyes. 6 days, he said. Think you can stand the scandal that long? I've stood worse. She moved into his arms naturally now. 6 days, and then no more separate rooms, no more wondering, no more pretending. Just us. Clay agreed, resting his chin on her head. Mr. and Mrs. Blackridge, shocking the town with their happiness. Terrible behavior, Ruby agreed solemnly.
What will people say? Let me think. Clay pretended to consider. Did you see how he looks at her? Have you noticed how she smiles now? Isn't it wonderful how happy they are? Ruby laughed. Optimist. Realist. He pulled back to see her face. We'll have our challenges. Ruby, there'll be hard times, disagreements, days when the past feels heavier than the future. But underneath all that, love. Ruby finished. Stubborn, determined, against all odds love. Exactly. They stood together in the kitchen where their story began, holding each other as night fell over red pines. In 6 days, they'd stand before God and the town and pledge themselves to each other. Some would approve. Some wouldn't. It didn't matter. What mattered was this 2 people who'd found each other across loss and distance, who'd built something new from the ashes of what was, not a replacement for the past, but a future all their own. I love you, Ruby said, just because she could. I love you too, Clay replied, sealing it with a kiss. Always. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle this time, but inside was warmth and light and the promise of tomorrow, and that was more than enough for anyone. The morning after their wedding dawned clear and cold, frost painting the windows in delicate patterns. Ruby woke slowly, disoriented by the unfamiliar warmth beside her, the weight of an arm across her waist. Then memory flooded back the ceremony, the simple reception in the church hall, the quiet ride home through falling snow, and Clay carrying her across the threshold of what was now truly their home. She turned carefully to study her husband's sleeping face, in repose, the lines of grief and worry smoothed away, leaving him looking younger, almost boyish. Ruby traced a finger along his jaw. Marveling at the reality of it, she was Mrs. Clay Blackridge now, not through deception or necessity, but through choice and love. Clay's eyes opened, gray and warm in the early light. Morning, Mrs. Blackridge. Morning, Mr. Blackridge. She couldn't help her smile. Sleep well. Better than I have in years. He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. No regrets. Only that we didn't do this sooner. They lay quietly for a while, listening to the ranch wake around them. Eventually, Clay sighed. I should check the stock. That new calf's been poorly. And I should start breakfast. The men will be expecting. Ruby stopped, laughing. Listen to us. Married one day and already talking about chores. Welcome to ranch life, Clay said with a grin. Though I was thinking, maybe we could hire a girl from town to help with the cooking. Free you up some. Ruby sat up, surprised. You want to hire someone else? Not to replace you, Clay said quickly. Never that, but you're the lady of the house now, not just the cook. Thought you might like time for other things. The garden you're planning, maybe starting that Sunday school you mentioned. Ruby had mentioned it once, weeks ago, how the town's children had no formal religious education outside Sunday sermons. That Clay had remembered, had thought about her dreams beyond the kitchen, made her throat tight. I love you, she said, because it needed saying. I love you too. Clay sat up, cupping her face. Ruby, I want you to have everything. Not just a roof and work, but a life. A full life. I already have that, she assured him. But yes, some help would be nice. Maybe the Hendricks girl she's been looking for work. I'll ride over this afternoon. Talk to her parents. Clay stretched, then swung his legs out of bed. But first, chores. Then I believe my wife promised me breakfast. Your wife promises many things, Ruby said, feeling daring. Breakfast is just the beginning. The look Clay gave her sent heat through her whole body. I'll hold you to that, Mrs. Blackridge. They dressed with new shyness, backs turned, stealing glances, married or not. Some adjustments would take time, But when they descended the stairs together, Clay's hand warm on Ruby's back. It felt right in a way nothing had before. The kitchen welcomed them with familiar comfort. Ruby tied on her apron while Clay built up the fire, moving in the easy rhythm they'd developed over months. But when she passed him to reach the coffee pot, he caught her waist, spinning her into a brief dance. Clay the biscuits. Can wait. He dipped her dramatically, making her laugh. I'm dancing with my wife in our kitchen. Let the world burn. The world might not, but breakfast will. Ruby protested, though she was laughing too hard to be serious. He set her upright, stealing a kiss before releasing her. Fine, but tonight we dance properly. I'll even attempt to carry a tune. Promises, promises. They were still smiling when the hands arrived, snow on their boots and knowing grins on their faces. Tom had his hat in hand, looking almost formal. Mrs. Blackridge, he said carefully, as if testing the words. Congratulations again. The boys and we wanted to say, that is, we're real happy for you both. Thank you, Tom. Ruby set plates before them, noting the small wrapped package Eddie was trying to hide. That's kind of you to say. We got you something, Eddie blurted, then flushed. It's not much, but it's from all of us, Joe interrupted, glaring at the youngster. Even Charlie from the general store chipped in. Clay accepted the package, unwrapping it carefully. Inside was a brass nameplate reading The Blackridge Ranch Clay and Ruby, Proprietors. Thought it might look nice on the gate, Tom said gruffly, seeing as it's both of yours now, proper-like. Ruby felt tears threaten. These rough men, who'd accepted her from the beginning, who'd watched her story with Clay unfold, they understood what this meant. It's perfect, she managed. We'll hang it today. I'll help, Eddie offered eagerly. And Tom's got something else to say. Don't you, Tom? The older man glared at Eddie, but cleared his throat. The missus and we'd be honored if you'd both come for Sunday dinner next week. She's been after me to invite you proper. Now that, he gestured vaguely. Now that things are settled. It was an olive branch from the town. Ruby realized. Tom Muller was respected. His acceptance would go a long way toward smoothing their path. We'd be delighted, Clay said, his hand finding Ruby's under the table. Thank Ruby for the invitation. After the men left for their morning work, Clay and Ruby stood together on the porch, watching them go. The nameplate gleamed in the winter sun. Shall we hang it now? Clay asked. In a moment, Ruby leaned against him, savoring the peace. I was just thinking about that first night, how you opened the door looking so lost and suspicious, how I stood there with my bag, trying to look confident when I was terrified. I was terrified too, Clay admitted. This woman showing up, sent by my dead wife, looking at me with those steady green eyes. I knew my life was about to change, just didn't know how much. For the better, I hope. Beyond better. He turned her to face him. Ruby, you gave me back my life. More than that, you gave me a new one. We gave each other new lives, Ruby corrected. That's what love does. Isn't it makes everything new? Before Clay could answer, a rider appeared on the road. As the figure drew closer, Ruby recognized Sarah's husband, Richard. Bit early for visitors, Clay murmured, but he was smiling. Richard dismounted, grinning broadly. Sorry to intrude on the newlyweds, but Sarah insisted I deliver this immediately. He handed over a telegram. And I'm to report back on how you both look, whether the house is standing, and if Ruby needs rescuing. Clay read the telegram, his expression softening. It's from Sarah. He showed it to Ruby. Dearest brother and new sister, stop, so happy for you both. Stop, Abby would be dancing. Stop all our love. Stop, P.S. Ruby. Welcome to the family officially. Stop, you already felt like a sister. Stop. That's lovely, Ruby said, blinking back tears. There's more, Richard said. Sarah wanted me to give you this. He produced a small wrapped box. It was Abby's. Sarah saved it after, said Abby would want Ruby to have it. Inside was a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. Clay's hands shook slightly as he opened it, revealing tiny photographs, one of a younger Clay and Abby on their wedding day, the other space empty. For your own photo, Richard explained. Sarah thought. That is, Abby always said the locket should hold the past and the future together. Ruby touched the locket gently. It's beautiful, but Clay, are you sure? Abby would love this, Clay said firmly. Richard, tell Sarah it's perfect. He fastened the chain around Ruby's neck, the gold warm against her skin. Past and future together. That's us, isn't it? Richard stayed for coffee, regaling them with stories of the boys' latest adventures before riding back to town. As his horse disappeared down the road, Ruby fingered the locket thoughtfully. I'd like to visit Abby's grave again, she said, to thank her, to tell her we're happy. She knows, Clay said softly. But yes, we'll go. Maybe take some of those dried flowers you've been saving. They spent the afternoon in quiet domesticity. Clay hung the nameplate while Ruby baked bread and planned the week's meals. When Emma Hendricks arrived with her parents to discuss the position, she was so eager and grateful that Ruby hired her on the spot. 3 mornings a week to start, Ruby explained. More during busy seasons. You'll help with cooking, cleaning, whatever's needed. Yes, ma'am, I mean, Mrs. Blackridge. Oh, I'm so pleased. Emma practically bounced. Ma says you make the best pies in the territory. Will you teach me? Of course, Ruby promised, charmed by the girl's enthusiasm. As evening fell, Clay kept his promise about dancing. He pushed the furniture back in the parlor, lit every lamp, and pulled Ruby into his arms. This time he did sing an old ballad about lovers reunited after trials. His voice was rough but true, and Ruby found herself crying happy tears. What's this? Clay asked, thumbing away the moisture. Can't have my wife crying on our 2nd day married. They're good tears, Ruby assured him. I never thought I'd have this, after James, after losing the baby. I thought my chance at happiness was gone. I came here expecting nothing but work and shelter. Instead, I found everything, Clay finished. I know. I felt the same. Like I was just going through motions until you arrived and reminded me that life was worth living fully. They danced until the fire burned low, then sat together on the sofa. Ruby curled against Clay's side. Through the window, stars emerged in the clear winter sky. What are you thinking? Clay asked, feeling her quiet. About circles, Ruby said. How things come round. Abby couldn't have children but raised Sarah. She couldn't be here for you but found me. I lost my child but found Hope, and Eddie, and now Emma to guide. Nothing's wasted, is it? Even the pain leads somewhere. To each other, Clay agreed. All of it led to us. Ruby smiled, settling deeper into his embrace. I told you once I'd just sleep. Do you remember that first night when you found me on the porch? I remember. His arms tightened around her. You were exhausted but trying to stay strong. I said we'd see about that sleep. Well, Ruby said, yawning despite herself. I think I might actually sleep well tonight. Here, home, with you. We'll see, Clay said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. We'll see. As they climbed the stairs to their room now. No more separation. Ruby touched the locket at her throat. Past and future together. Sarah had said it was perfect. Really, they carried their pasts with them. Clay and Ruby both. But those pasts had led them here. To this moment. To each other. And the future, well, the future spread before them like the ranch lands spread beyond their door, vast and challenging and full of possibility. There would be more storms, more struggles, more losses to weather. But there would also be more dances in the parlor, more mornings waking together, more evenings by the fire. Children, perhaps, if they were blessed. Years of work and love and ordinary miracles.
I love you,
Ruby whispered into the darkness of their room.
I love you too,
Clay responded, pulling her close, now and always. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle and clean. But inside was warmth and love and the quiet breathing of two people who'd found their way home to each other. Ruby closed her eyes, Clay's heartbeat steady beneath her ear, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, felt completely at peace. She was home. They both were. And that, as Clay would say, was that the beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you enjoyed following Ruby and Clay's journey to love, please let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I'd love to connect and hear your thoughts about their story. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and give this video a like if it touched your heart. And if you really want to help more people discover this tale of love and second chances, please hit that hype button. Your support means the world and helps these frontier stories reach more listeners. Until next time, partners.